the next move, which will essentially be phase 7 after of the war, after this current Russian offensive culminates, is the Ukraine offensive. Now, it does, but what it really shows you, they should have been doing combined arms training in Belarus, or apparently were, before they were committed to the theatre of operations. But if morale is low, it shows you that the training and the way that they use their personnel has gone awry. And that is why we're still having this minimal progress all around the place. So people are no longer talking about Bakhmut at the moment, because that has stabilized, General Zaluzhny's words. And this week, really, people were talking about Avdiivka, and
Yes.
this is where they've met their sort of demise. So they are trying to still encircle there, but they're just getting nowhere. And so on the tactical level, Russia are getting nowhere. But it's often worth remembering that Tolstoy's two most powerful warriors are time and patience. And certainly at the longer term time frame, Putin still believes that time is on his side. In the shorter time frame, Ukraine believes that time is on its side, because the next move, which will essentially be phase 7 after of the war, after this current Russian offensive culminates, is the Ukraine offensive. Now, I don't think that's going to happen in the next week or 2 weeks. And just showing, for example, the Challenger 2s now in Ukraine is not the same as having that combined arms capability, which is what we've seen lacking from the Russians in that report that you just said, John.
Yes, I mean, I'm reading more about this this town Avdiivka now. We've had weeks of the battle for Bakhmut, which has been bloody and something of a stalemate. Now we hear about Avdiivka, and I read Russian forces have been diverted, hoping to encircle the Ukrainians there. What is the significance of Avdiivka now? Although, is it rather like Bakhmut, which is more symbolic than strategic?
Well, all of those things still apply. I've kept on saying that, Bakhmut by itself had no significance, apart from, if you could take a town of that size, it would show from a Russian perspective potentially that it was the end of the beginning, even though Bakhmut was pre-war the size and population of Crewe. And of course, in relation to Crewe's geography to Manchester and Liverpool, for example, you'd be better off taking Manchester and Liverpool and leaving Crewe alone. And that's the same in terms of Bakhmut and its relationship to Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. So it's the same dilemma. They're just into an attritional grind along the front. But all this still plays, really, in my view, into the Ukrainian hand, in that the Russians are still on the offensive. They can still be chewed up. And at the time and place of the Ukrainians choosing, they can go on the offensive. We hope that will be successful.
Yeah.
But if it's not, then we go back to the same dilemma of if you can't have decisive military victory, then one of the ways that you get to a point of negotiation is because of the improbability of military victory.
I also read, Chip, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, saying that Ukraine is not in a position yet to launch this counter-offensive that we've been waiting for. They don't have the equipment in place to do that. Do you take that at face value, or could this be part of the process of keeping the Russians on the hop?
Well, of course it could, and security and surprise and deception are three kind of principles of war. But I don't think they're ready yet, because a capability needs an integration of training, equipment, personnel, intelligence doctrine, logistics, and it's not just having the tanks, it's having the combat support. That's the engineers and artillery and everything that goes with that. So, for example, from the British perspective, I think they've just concluded the AS-90, the 155 British artillery training. That needs to be integrated. And of course, you need significant logistics, the combat service support, to enable you to go the operational distances that you want to be successful. So I don't think they're there yet. They're getting there, but it's not next week for an offensive from the Ukrainians.
And meanwhile, the sort of pitch of rhetoric on the Russian side just keeps going up and up, doesn't it? I know you've been watching people like Dmitry Medvedev. He was formerly the Russian leader, although even while he had that role, we knew obviously that Putin was the power behind the throne, and he's been talking very tough lately.
Well, he's been really the sort of rhetoric general in chief throughout the war. He's the go-to guy on the rhetoric. But there is a rhetoric reality gap. But one of the significant things he said, which really plays in with this notion of Putin having a maximalist agenda, and you're not Ukrainian, you're Russian, is that he's mentioned, for example, that even if they were to negotiate the annexation of the Oblast, the ones we know about both in Donbass and Zaporizhia and Kherson, that they would need a significant demilitarized zone the other side of that. And if they didn't get it, they'd have to go to Kyiv and Lvov. Now, of course, Lvov is in the west of the country. So essentially, they're saying again that Ukraine doesn't exist. The problem they've got is they've still got these maximalist goals with a sort of minimalist armed forces, and save for four things, which are either further mobilization, or nationalizing the industry, or mobilizing the economy, or using nuclear weapons, then they still have a dilemma on their hands. And it was the use or the notion of placing nuclear arms in Belarus, which is designed to scare the West from providing more support to Ukraine, which we mustn't do. Mustn't be scared by that, because otherwise, if we allow this to become an instrument of statecraft for the future, that would actually, in the strategic sense, lead to nuclear proliferation elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, well, some of the rhetoric has certainly been maximalist, hasn't it? Medvedev talking the other day about the possibility of a strike on the International Criminal Court, which is pretty overblown stuff. And meanwhile, on the ground, or rather at sea, Russia have launched a test missile in the Sea of Japan. So Putin doesn't seem to recognize the very notion of overreach.
No, he doesn't. But all this is designed really for the sort of three audiences we've really talked about for the last year. You have your internal audience that you're trying to reach out to, and of course, the public rhetoric around why he's done this was to do with the fact that some of the ammunition going with the Challenger 2s is depleted uranium. That's a ridiculous notion of why you would deploy missiles to Belarus or even in the Sea of Japan, because in fact the T-80 BVM, a Russian tank, also uses a depleted uranium round. So it's not that this is serious escalation, as Putin says, but that plays with the audience at home, that this is NATO that we're fighting. It's an existential war, and people equate, of course, uranium to nuclear weapons and nuclear arms, and it's not the same thing.